Hello YouTube, I'm Tom, and today we are doing another bit of crafting, building what I've dubbed a rad condenser from scratch. Answers in the comments if you have some lore for whatever it is. While collecting bits for my last scratch build, I ended up with all the parts for this one and ran with it. Even though I kinda managed to make a vape, we'll gloss over that, I think it's another terrain piece that can be just terrain, or be some kind of strategic objective, and I like that. The main component of the build is this vitamin bottle. When I pulled it out of the pile, I immediately had the idea for the build. I started by giving it a good sand, as I knew the plastic type would be difficult without it. I wetted my sanding sponges to cut down the amount of particulates from the plastic. Next, I wanted to cover the text on the lid. I had an offcut of 2.5mm styrene that looked transparent enough that I might be able to trace the shape I wanted directly from the top. In fact, I could not, and just flipped it over, drew the outline, and then drew an internal line offset to around 3mm. I then cut around the internal line with scissors. The shape wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for something as old and crusty as I intended this piece to be. I started cutting down some micro irrigation connectors to create some pipes, running up the sides of the main body, when I realised I needed to cover up the lid joint. For this, I used more styrene offcut. First checking I had enough to go all the way around, before measuring, cutting and gluing it to the body. Then I went back to finishing making the pipes. These are created as described in my storage tanks video, link in the description to that. With the pipes drying, I measured out a base on 2mm Foamex. I wanted to disguise the bottom of the vitamin pot and blend it into the base. To do this, I took a chunk of 5mm underfloor XPS foam, drew around the pot bottom, cut the hole and checked it fit. The fit was good, and I moved on to playing about with positioning of the pipes. I decided on some minor elevation in the form of more underfloor XPS. This was for more detail and to provide a good anchor for the pipes, as you'll see in a minute. I traced around the cutaway section before cutting the new piece. Next, I glued the pot and the foam to the base and the XPS chunks on top. At the base of each of the pipes, I had a length of wire to pierce into the XPS foam. This may seem like overkill, and perhaps it was, but these sticky out pipes are just ripe for catching on something and getting yanked out. The pipe ends were glued, and I dropped the first one into place, only to discover I'd made the anchor too long. I pulled it out, cut it down, tried again, and this time it fit. The second pipe should have been easier, with an appropriately trimmed anchor. However, I'd not only left this one too long as well, the foam razor I'd intended to use made the connection point too high. I quickly whipped out the razor, cut down the wire, and got the pipe in. To complete the look of the rad condenser, I wanted a chimney and an intake. These were made of various plastic recycling bits that fitted together happily. Next came the details. The first of these were scavenged from some broken EVA fairy wings. Initially I took the glittery square bits for corner detail, before cutting some panels from the wings themselves. This was far more tense than you might expect. My kids were in the house, and if they spotted me defiling the wings, I'd have been in trouble. Along with the EVA panels, I added a few offcuts for signage and visual interest. After the panels, we of course need some studs. I used some chunky boys at the top and on the corners, and the small 1mm studs for the panelling. Next was the rust texture. I used this method on a previous build, but hadn't recorded the process, so I made an extra effort not to forget this time. We want a fine texture for the rust, and baking powder is great for it. I paste on glue, then sprinkle it, along with some small amounts of sand, over the top before tapping away the excess. I tried to be reserved with this, as there isn't a great amount of surface area, and I didn't want to clog it all up with rust. As you can see, I got a little carried away. But hey, it's fine, it's meant to look old. I don't have a baking powder problem, you do! With the texture dry, she got 2 coats of gesso primer. This was brush painted, then stippled before it dried. The stippling does an awesome job of disguising the brush strokes and adding a really subtle texture. I then added a base coat of yellow with the airbrush, and a lighter yellow mostly from above. The signage that would be white was then base coated white, and the big panels were painted dark blue, before the pipes and the main chimney got a coat of brown-black. Then I moved on to the obligatory hazard stripes, choosing red and white as there was enough yellow already. I followed this with dark silver over the chimney and pipe corners, before moving on to signage and base coating the concrete on the base. And here are all the base colours down and ready for weathering. I started with my usual black-brown chipping. This is applied with a sponge, focusing on the edges that would receive the most natural wear. Next, I use a process that worked really well on my last build. I used 2 inks, red oxide and dioxazine purple, mixed with plenty of medium. The purple went into the very depths of the rust and slightly around, and each time I had a few chunks painted in, I'd clean my brush and use water to diffuse the edges and soften the transition. And when the purple was dry, I repeated the process with the oxide red, but only over the main rust patches. And here, with both inks dry, you can see the really great foundation we've laid for the next step, oils. I started off with raw umber for the shading, which I applied thinly into all the recesses before using a brush dampened with mineral spirits to soften the edges and remove the excess paint. With the shading dry, I mixed up ochre, orange and more raw umber into thick wash consistency. I then moved around painting into the main rust spots and applying dots of the 3 colours over the areas of chipping and where I wanted general streaks. After giving the initial layer a little time to dry, I used a brush dampened with mineral spirits to diffuse the main rust sections and streak the dots down the edges. It was somewhere around here I started to notice that I might have gone a little overboard with the grime. I think yellow is the hardest to get right with heavy weathering, and the next yellow thing I paint, I'm going to try and remember this lesson. As a finishing touch, I wanted to add some mushrooms from a recent video on how to use up leftover epoxy putty. To attach them, I drilled small holes for the internal rods, added a blob of glue and popped them in. As with my previous video, I wanted to lock and blend these in with some moss. This is a roughly 50-50 mix of glue and water, with fine sponge flock, added slowly until you get a good consistency. It was a little fiddly to apply, getting in behind the mushrooms was tricky, but I really like the combo with the mushrooms adding some detail and a pop of colour. And there we have it. Another chunk out of my pile of recycling. I'm really happy with the rust method, even if I did overdo it. And the rad condenser / vape will make a nice point of interest in games. I'll leave you with a few action shots. See ya to Youb!